There's a situation going on in Santa Monica. I know there is some housing that your city is building for the homeless.
If you know Santa Monica, the two top attractions there are the pier. The second would be 3rd Street Promenade. We're now going to build homeless housing here. The value of that land was around 120 to 150 million. If they're building 120 units on there, that's $1 million per unit of just land value, taxpayer land value. The city is committing to spend $1 million per unit beyond that. So you're now talking about homeless housing located on some of the most expensive land on earth, occupying what used to be a much needed parking garage at a cost of $2 million per unit. The council is justifying it, saying it's very needed, somehow it's environmentally beneficial, that it's practicing equity by allowing the homeless individuals to be living, in a nice area.
My guest today is Dr. Houman David. He's an activist and resident of Los Angeles, who over the years has been observing how Los Angeles is dealing with the homeless in the county, in different cities, including the city of Santa Monica.
I've seen people who've owned buildings and wanted to develop them for medical purposes who've given up and said, you know what, I'm turning into homeless housing. I'm going to make more money quicker because the city will just write me unlimited checks. And that's what's happening. Again, there is a housing component that's important. There are already 4,000 vacant units for rent in the city property. Why on the earth does the city have to give away land and build 120 something more units when they can simply go and rent the existing ones out? Why? Because no one's making money off of that.
I'm Siyamak. Welcome to California Insider. Houman David, it's great to have you on California Insider. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Siyamak.
Houman, there's a situation going on in Santa Monica, and you were tweeting about this. There is some housing that you guys are building, your city is building for the homeless, and they cost about $1 million each. And then there's also $1 million of land. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so Santa Monica, as you know, has long had a large homeless population, largely because it's on the beach and the weather is nice, and the city has also been increasingly welcoming to the homeless. They don't prosecute them for committing crimes. They allow them to occupy parks. They've even been giving them drug needles to use without exchanging them or giving them a place to put away. They provide a lot of regional social services, which attracts a lot of homeless people there. And because of that ballooning homeless population, the city has said we are committed to housing them. They have a housing first approach, as many municipalities do. The problem is the city decided that instead of having private entities construct homeless housing or to use existing facilities like warehouses or even condos, hotels, apartments, etc., that the city is going to personally be involved in the homeless housing construction, and one way they would do it is by donating city-owned land. That, to some degree, could make sense. The problem is that the land that the city decided to donate was parking structure number 3 next to 3rd Street Promenade. And if you know Santa Monica, the two top attractions there are the pier and beach, and then the second would be 3rd Street Promenade, which is a big pedestrian avenue, right, where there are shops and restaurants, where there were. Many of them are gone now. But what happened is during the pandemic, they said, oh, well, no one's using parking structure 3. Of course not, because everything was closed. They used that as a justification to take something that was a taxpayer-funded, taxpayer-owned, and essential infrastructure that was generating money for the city with all the parking revenue, knocked it down very quickly and said, we're now going to build homeless housing here. The value of that land was around 120 to 150 million. At the very low end, let's say 120 million, if they're building 120 units on there, that's $1 million per unit of just land value, taxpayer land value, not to mention the lost income from all the parking revenue. And on top of that, the city is committing to spend $1 million per unit beyond that. So you're now talking about homeless housing located on some of the most expensive land on earth, occupying what used to be a much needed parking garage at a cost of $2 million per unit. And I think that's astronomical. No one has ever heard of something that high. And the council is justifying it, saying it's very needed, somehow it's environmentally beneficial, that it's practicing equity by allowing the homeless individuals to be living in a nice area rather than pushing them off to some corner of the city or the county. But at the same time, it's removing the ability to have parking for people who need it and businesses that need to become revitalized in the city center, the core of our economic engine in Santa Monica. And it's putting people right smack in the middle of that area who, many of whom have drug abuse problems, violence issues, criminal tendencies, and who tend to harass pedestrians and tourists and shoppers loiter in areas and make it very difficult for businesses to operate or come back to that area.
Now, Houman, there's an issue with homelessness in LA, because even if this housing goes through, is 120 units for people?
That's it.
And there's thousands of homeless people in Santa Monica, right?
In Santa Monica, by the latest count, was 1,000, but that was before they've announced the $2 million condos. You can imagine this may create what I call induced demand. All of a sudden, people are going to hear that you go to Santa Monica, you get a nice condo with an ocean view, they're going to start flooding in. But even at 1,000 homeless at $2 million apiece, you're talking about $2 billion and loss of city infrastructure, additional loss to construct housing. That's unfeasible for a city of 90,000 people that happens to also be bankrupt. It's not possible. So I don't know what they're thinking with this.
Now, you are a doctor and you have volunteered and to help the homeless, and you kind of have a good perspective into what's going on in homelessness in LA. Can you tell us your story? How did you get to know about what's happening with homelessness in LA?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking me. I was a medical student at UCLA back in the 90s. And one of the hospitals, the teaching hospitals where UCLA medical students would rotate through, was the West Los Angeles VA. That's basically run by UCLA Medical Center and their faculty. So that place, that's the big flagship hospital for the entire West Coast that takes care of a very large veteran population, including a large homeless veteran population locally as well as from around the region. And I was assigned to do many rotations there, one of which was my psychiatry rotation. And one thing many people are unaware of is the West Los Angeles VA houses one of the most successful landmark mental health and drug abuse programs in the entire world. And it's called the Dual Diagnosis Treatment Program.
And that's in LA.
It's in LA. It's at the West LA VA. People don't see it because it's buried deep within this building. And it was started by a professor named Dr. William Wershing, a renowned psychiatrist, and it created a program for people who have dual diagnoses, so mental health and drug abuse. And it took people who had those two diagnoses, who were veterans, people who we owe everything to because they've risked everything for their country, for our country, and said people who have two diagnoses who also cannot take good care of themselves, right? Who can't house themselves, can't work for themselves, maybe a danger to themselves, maybe a danger to other people, maybe a combination of all of those factors. And we're going to put them inpatient for weeks, if not months, into a locked facility. They cannot leave, right? Many of them do that voluntarily. Some of them do it involuntarily. But regardless, they're in that place. It's locked, right? The doctors come and go, of course, but they sleep there, they live there, and what do they do all day? They get mental health treatment in terms of individual therapy that I did a lot of, group therapy that I did a lot of, as well as drug abuse therapy, including medications as well as individual and group therapy as well. And what happens to these people? Many of them are homeless, right? Many of them are on the verge of homelessness. Many of them are violent. They're committing crimes. They have no hope for the future at all. They enter that program, and it was miraculous. It was almost like magic. I would watch them after a matter of weeks, sometimes months, leave that place fully functional members of society. They got back their independence, their dignity, they were able to work again, and that's what I saw it takes. And since then, I've spent a lot of my time dedicated to helping people who are in similar situations through medical care, realizing that you need to take care of their mind and body in addition to taking care of their economic and housing issues.
So was there a point where you realized something we're doing in LA maybe is not correct compared to what you have seen work?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the fact that there is an absolute disconnect between the dollars spent and the impact that we have. You can spend unlimited amounts of dollars, but if it's spent incorrectly on the wrong things, it won't have an impact. And in fact, things are going to continue getting worse during that time. And that's what we've seen in LA. It's what we've seen in California. Many people spend with good intentions. Many people spend because, frankly, I think there's a homeless industrial complex and people are profiting heavily off of it, whether it's developers, whether it's service providers, whether it's other folks in the industry. But regardless of their intent and how good it may be or nefarious it may be, it hasn't had the impact, but they continue doing what has failed over and over again. And in fact, if anything, they've been doubling down on it, throwing more good money after bad. And I think that needs to stop. We need what I call evidence-based practices, right? In medicine, you don't just go willy-nilly treat a patient based on how you feel. You read the literature, you look to see what clinical trials have shown, and you follow evidence-based medicine. And we need evidence-based management of the homelessness crisis, what has worked, and we know what works. There's plenty of literature, there's plenty of actual real life experience, and more importantly, there's plenty of common sense, things that even a small child, like my own kids, would understand, which is if someone has a drug problem or a mental health problem, if someone is a criminal, giving them a free house, no matter how much it costs, no matter how nice it is, no matter where it's located, will not be solved. That person may technically have a roof over their head, but they're still a homeless person. They're still dependent on the government for the rest of their life. They're still suffering on the inside, and we treat them like another species rather than recognizing that they're another human being. And we need to treat them with dignity and give them the opportunity to become independent and live normal lives. But instead, I think they're being used as political pawns and treated as if there's some other kind of species that we need to stay away from and box into these little buildings to stay away from us. And that's not right. On many levels, it's not right.
There's a discrepancy in LA, like with people on the streets. They have their situation, and then the government has their programs, but there's a mismatch of what's happening.
Yeah.
Was there a time you figured this out? Did you?
Yeah, I was living in Brentwood for several years, starting in 2013 to 2019, and I lived right on Montana Avenue, right by the West LA VA campus, right? This is a place where a lot of veterans come to get their medical care, and so they tend to live nearby, right? But the ones who are homeless, they live where? On the perimeter of that VA, rather than being housed on the inside in a facility that was donated to the VA, a multi-billion-dollar chunk of land, the best land in all of LA, right, that was donated many years ago to the Veterans Administration for the purpose of housing and taking care of homeless veterans. But guess what? All of those buildings on that VA campus are empty. Instead, they're leasing land out to a private school that costs almost $100,000 a year, UCLA's baseball field, a bus storage facility, so many other things, and they're doing everything with that land except using their existing space to house homeless veterans. And so what were they doing with that space? Leaving it empty for the most part. And what happened to the homeless? To all these veterans who need care and deserve it. We've promised it to them. They're sitting in tents right along San Vicente in Montana, all taking up space, dying of drug overdoses on a regular basis. Nearly every day one of them would die, getting involved in violence, getting involved in crime.
And you would see all this.
And I would live right next to it. And so when I moved there, that didn't exist. But then over a period of just 3 or 4 years, when I arrived there, it transformed from being a clean, safe, walkable community to being a place where anytime I stepped foot out of my house, I'd be assaulted. I got chased down an alleyway one night at 9 p.m. coming back from a coffee shop, something that most people there would do on a daily basis. Couldn't do it anymore. And so I started an organization called the Brentwood Homeless Action Coalition, a loose affiliation of people who lived in Brentwood who were fed up with things. And we didn't say remove the homeless. We didn't say go arrest everyone. We said take care of them. These are people who are veterans. They're people who we have made a sacred promise to because they have made a sacred sacrifice for us. For many of them, their mental health issues and drug abuse issues are attributable to their military service, right? From the horrors of things they saw in Vietnam, the Gulf War, Iraq, etc. Some of them in World War II. We owe it to them, but instead, they just weren't allowing them inside. They would allow them to come in just for medical care real quick, and again, kicked off to sleep on the street.
Why do you think that was?
Why?
Yeah.
Zero prioritization. The people running that VA campus, and they've gotten into trouble for it, frankly. They didn't want to deal with what they viewed as a problem. They wanted things that were making money for them, like renting space out to bus storage and to a private school that pays them a ton of money. They didn't want people on there who they had to manage, who were a nuisance to them. And they knew that if they were outside their walls, they suddenly became an LA County and LA City problem, not theirs.
So you mentioned that they didn't have the right priorities. Like, how did you figure that out?
One is this is something that everyone knows in that area. In Brentwood, which is right by the West LA VA campus, everyone is aware that they were not spending the money that they had on taking care of the homeless veterans and instead pushed them out. It was a widely known thing. There'd been lawsuits regarding it, in fact. There was a lot of uproar, and I knew some of these guys. Remember, I had taken care of them back in my medical school days. I worked at a VA in Northern California that actually did a much better job in Palo Alto, actually taking care of them the way they needed to be. And I saw a huge disconnect here between what they'd been doing in Northern and Southern California. And I realized that clearly there's something wrong. And I realized that it's also time to act. And the only way that we could get something to change was by drawing attention to it. And ultimately, so much attention was drawn to the issue that Congressman Ted Lieu couldn't ignore it anymore. You had media doing, like national media doing shows live from that facility just to illustrate how bad it's gotten, made an example of it. And at that point, suddenly they said, okay, we're going to clean up the sidewalk. We're going to put tiny homes on that campus. Let's move enough of them in that you don't have this massive homeless population in that community.
Are you concerned with stock market volatility?
The markets closing in on their worst year since the financial crisis.
Two of the major indices had their worst day since 2020.
U.S. financial markets had their worst day since the start of the pandemic.
Do you really trust this economy?
Rumors are growing that the U.S. economy could be headed for a recession.
Inflation soaring to its highest level in nearly 40 years. Prices for gas and groceries are so high. Inflation sending already sky-high prices soaring even higher across the board.
What if you could invest in a portfolio with a higher fixed rate of return that's not correlated to the stock market? You can turn your monthly income on or off, compound it, whatever you choose, and there is no loss of principal if you need your money back. And absolutely, there are no fees. Just log on to investverify.com. Folks, I personally invest my own money with Verify. Log on to investverify.com or call 888-VERIFY-24. Now let's go back to the interview. And you have seen this work for the veterans in that facility
Yes.
that you mentioned that you were. Why do you think LA is not doing this, like these kind of facilities? What do you think is going on?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think there's a lot of misdirected compassion where people really truly believe that when someone is homeless, that you just give them a home and all of a sudden it's all cured, right? So there is that aspect of it. But second, a lot of it is money. When I look at Instagram or Twitter, I see a lot of people who are developers, big development organizations, individual developers, bragging about how much money they've made selling buildings or selling land or selling hotels or motels to the city of LA to be used as homeless housing, right? They're laughing all the way to the bank. And I think it's turned into a big industry. And so you have a lot of lobbying efforts from the development industry, from the services industry, who need this crisis to perpetuate in order to make money. I've seen people who've owned buildings and wanted to develop them for medical purposes who've given up and said, you know what, I'm turning into homeless housing. I'm going to make more money quicker because the city will just write me unlimited checks. And that's what's happening. Again, there is a housing component that's important, but it shouldn't be permanent. We should help people and give them the ability to become independent and have that dignity. And second, there's no reason why that housing should cost so much when regular housing that's not for homeless costs a small fraction of what that is. On top of that, you look at Santa Monica, there are already 4,000 vacant units for rent in the city property. So when there are 4,000 vacant units in the city of Santa Monica, why on earth does the city have to give away land and build 120-something more units when they can simply go and rent the existing ones out? Why? Because no one's making money off of that.
That's probably going to cost less, and they can even house a lot more people, right?
You would think. But again, there's no profit to be made, right? The only person making a little bit of money is the apartment owner, but there's no one making millions upon millions on that, and no one's taking city land for free.
This is happening across the state. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of programs. We've spent $24 billion, and there's an audit recently that the results showed that nobody's really tracking. There's only 2 programs that were tracking out of the 5 how these programs are doing.
And the same thing has happened in Santa Monica. They recently tried to track the money that the city has been spending, tens of millions. Can't really track it. They have no idea, and no one's following up on it to really see where this has gone. And the reason why they can't is that much of it has just disappeared. Much of it has literally gone into the pockets of organizations, individuals who claim to have been, have a mission to do something, and it's been pocketed. They've given it to themselves as salaries. They've handed it out to consultants who are really connected to them somehow. They've overspent on construction, and that money's been blown. That money, a fraction of it, could have been used to actually do affordably constructed housing, leasing and building things that exist, and on top of that, providing the much needed services that you actually need to get people out of homelessness for good, back to independence. And no one is focused on that last piece.
A lot of state leaders watch this show, and it's important for them to see How does that last piece work when you're doing your work?
Yeah, so this is not just things that I have done, but these are things that many around have done as well. But when you look at it, we need to do not a one-size-fits-all approach to homelessness. What we need to do is an individualized approach, have case managers, social workers involved with each person, identify what their needs are, right? There are certain people for whom economic issues are their only issue, and for whom a temporary rent subsidy, right, or relocation to a cheaper place while they're looking for a better job or any job, right, assistance with employment is more than sufficient. There are other people who have a severe mental health issue, who need inpatient, intensive mental health care. There are other people who are addicted to drugs, and it's not easy to just get off drugs. You can't just tell them, stop using fentanyl, right? That requires, again, intense supervision. And there are many people who simply have other factors involved. They may have a social issue. We have a lot of women who are homeless because they come from a situation where there's domestic violence, right? We can't treat them the same way that we treat people who are homeless for economic or psychiatric reasons. And I think we forget that. And there are a lot of homeless children as well who did nothing wrong, who don't deserve this, who need all of our attention, and they need to get whatever we have available to them so that they have a chance to have a normal life rather than being doomed to something that they never chose. What I've seen is programs that individualize their care, that identify what individual problems are, and then spend that effort, right, really addressing those individual problems, giving job training and placement to those who need it, giving temporary housing with mental health and drug abuse services, right, or a combination thereof, are the ones that succeed. And I think we haven't been going down that path. All we've been doing is celebrating the large housing projects, ribbon cuttings, press releases, etc., rather than sitting down and doing the non-glamorous but hard work that's required to actually help people. The other aspect that I haven't talked about is the fact that in order for people, many people who are homeless, to get out of the situation, they need to be around family. They need to be with their loved ones. For so many of those people, if they were near their family would house them, right? Hey, sleep in my guest room, sleep on my couch. Let me house and feed you for a little while you get back on your feet. So many of the homeless in LA and Santa Monica and California in general are from out of the state, out of the city, right? They come here for the weather, they come here for the free services, etc., right? And what does that do? It takes them away from their support system. And you need that. Ultimately, the government can't be someone's family, no matter how hard we try, right? And one of the key pieces of the puzzle that's missing is to identify who is from somewhere else and how can we reunite them with people who care about them. You know, I came to the US as an immigrant with my family when the Islamic Revolution in Iran happened in 1979, right? We came here with no money, no belongings, right? We had a green card, we legally immigrated here, but we had nothing. And what do? Right? We were technically homeless when you think about it. What do? We lived in my uncle's guest bedroom. My mom, my dad, me, and my newborn brother, who was born like shortly after we arrived here, right?
So all in family living in one bedroom.
Right? And we did that for a long time in my uncle's house, right? And I'm sure, and we had one little tiny car, a VW Beetle. You can imagine these old beaten up things, but that's what we had. And we made do with that, and ultimately we came out of that and prospered because this is America and we found the dream, right? But so many people are robbed of that dream because they don't have that family near them, right? And they don't have that support system. And again, no amount of money, no government structure whatsoever, right, can substitute for family and community support. And I think ultimately that one of the big missing pieces is to have people reunited with their family. And that's not something that happens automatically. You have to spend the time getting to know them, finding out where their family are, talking to their family, bringing them together, even if it's in another city, right? Because ultimately that's what's compassionate and that's what's going to get them back on their feet again.
Now, Houman, you have been very vocal about issues in LA, and you're a doctor. Did you face any challenges or difficulties? Because a lot of people are afraid of, for example, talking about homelessness.
You know, for me, I realize that if I'm silent, I'm basically complicit, right? If you don't speak out, you're basically guilty of whatever you're not speaking out about. And I couldn't face that for myself. It's one of the values that I think my parents taught me, is that you have a duty to speak out and a duty to act. And I couldn't live with myself sitting back and watching this happen. I never wanted to be politically involved. My entire life, I was very happy being a physician, being a scientist, doing research, taking care of patients, being a dad, right? Being a husband, and being a good citizen, right? There are a lot of hats that I was wearing. politics, anything related to the political system was last on my mind. My political involvement consisted of voting, right? And I felt that that was my duty. Then the pandemic happened, right? And when COVID hit, I saw many aspects of the government, from the county public health system, my local city, all the way up to the state and even the federal government, abusing some of their powers, misinterpreting a lot of the scientific principles, collecting, consolidating control over people, and abusing it, frankly, and taking away that sense of individuality, right, and self-determination. And I said, this is a time to speak out. What happened is, as I dug deeply into that, as I started speaking out locally, I got involved on local media, eventually, state and national media. And once I did that, all of a sudden, my eyes opened to so many other things. And I realized that now that I have the ability to speak, now that I have a voice, if I don't use that voice to call out problems such as the homelessness issue and so many others, and actually do something about it, I'm doing something wrong. And so I actually see a moral duty, an obligation on my part to actually do something. And had it not been for the pandemic, I don't think I'd be doing this. And many of us similarly have ended up in this place. When I look at all of this recent generation of people who are activists, who are running for school board, who are running for city council, running for state level offices, etc., so many of them were people who were very happy doing whatever they did, right? Their day jobs, being parents, and as their full-time job, right? God bless them, it was wonderful. But then all of us together realize that unless we physically, personally get involved, nothing is going to change. And so I think this is one of the silver linings on the troubles that happened to us as a society during COVID, is that it woke up a lot of people and got us involved in the system, whereas we otherwise may not have been.
Was this process of you going public, talking to media, commenting on issues, was it challenging? Was it difficult?
It's funny. I get asked that a lot. And you would think that there would be some kind of challenges. In fact, it was the exact opposite for me. What happened was, the moment I started speaking out, and I started off a little quietly, and I got a little louder and broader over time, the more people would, come to me privately. People I knew, and ultimately people I didn't know, complete strangers, many of whom are now some of my closest friends on earth, saying, thank you. You say exactly what I've been thinking, but I've been afraid to say it. Or I haven't had the words to say it. Or I've been threatened if I say it, right? By retaliation, professionally or within my family, etc., right? Did I fear that a little bit? Of course, but I realized ultimately that certain things superseded my fear, right? And it was my duty to speak. And the more I spoke, the more I got feedback from people who energized me, who said, keep this up, and kept giving me ideas. And I got feedback. People, even to this day, constantly reach out and say, you know what? I understand what you're saying about this. This is why I disagree. Let me tell you. And I would engage with them, right? I would say, please tell me more. I want feedback. This is how I improve, and this is how we improve as a society. I want feedback because then I can say what you're thinking, right? And ultimately, I think for me, this has snowballed. It has become almost like a movement of sorts, grassroots, right? But I speak for a lot of people, I think, who are fed up and who haven't had a way or a place to say these things, but who feel frustrated with the system, want things to change, realize that change isn't always happening at the ballot box because the choices that are available to them aren't producing that ability. They both are horrible, right? And ultimately realize that we need to change the system completely, and the only way to do is bring in people from outside the political establishment to get very involved.
Why are so many people leaving California? It wasn't long ago, people from everywhere wanted to move to the Golden State to enjoy a better life. Sadly, the standard of living has been dropping in the past decade. Are you like me and wonder why this is happening? I'm Siyamak, host of California Insider. In our film, Leaving California, The Untold Story, I take you an intimate journey of love, loss, tragedy, and hope as residents face the prospect of leaving their beloved state. Everyday people like you tell their stories about why they have to move out of the state even though they don't want to. Experts and policymakers also give insights about what's happening behind the scenes. Together, we get to the root cause of this exodus. Go to leavingcalifornia.com to view the first 15 minutes of the film for free. By watching Leaving California, you can be part of the solution. Again, go to leavingcalifornia.com. Now, Houman, this is a lot of work, right? You're just keeping up with all the news and everything and studying all these issues. Why are you doing it?
I do it because I came here as an immigrant, right? I came here from a country that would have jailed my parents, jailed me, right? That said, we're inferior, we're somehow bad, horrible people because we didn't believe in the principles of the Islamic Revolution. We didn't want to cover our heads. We didn't want to bow to the religious clerics in Iran and follow their will, right? And that was a crime over there, right? We were embraced by the United States. This is a country that took in so many from our community, gave us opportunities that are unimaginable, right? And we came here at a time when, by the way, Iran was an enemy country. Right? This was the time of the Iranian hostage crisis. We came here as
very
people,
difficult time
right?
for Iranians.
We came here as people from an enemy country. There was discrimination, but guess what? None of us said. My parents not once said, "Oh, we're being discriminated against. This is a racist country." You know what my parents said? And I've that value has carried over to me. They said, "You know what? Let's prove them wrong. Let's succeed. We're going to get back at them by succeeding and showing them that we're actually going to contribute to their society and make it better." And all of them did. My parents did. All of us who came in from Iran around 1979, 1980, etc., have contributed to society in massive ways, all right? Prospered, fulfilled the American dream. And that American dream now is less attainable, in fact, if not impossible, for so many people. People who live here, people who are new immigrants, and everything in between. And I think I realized this sense of obligation, of almost guilt even, that other people can't have what I had so easily, right? Right now, there are a lot of barriers placed, many of which are placed by the government, that simply now takes advantage of people who are downtrodden, who are in need of assistance, and said, "You know what? Why don't you become dependent on us forever?" And I think we need to go back to the values that we had before, which is support people, give them the tools they need to prosper, and then allow them to prosper. The thing I always ask is, how many times have you seen someone on government assistance who's become well off? Who's become wealthy, who's been very successful? You don't. By and large, most people get stuck in that system, right? They get stuck renting an affordable apartment for the rest of their life. They get stuck in a fast food job, getting welfare and getting other government benefits forever. And ultimately, we need to move beyond that. And we're a society that used to have that, right? We had the California dream. We had the American dream. Right? And that's gone. People are robbed of that, and I think that's a shame, right? And I think it's time to really turn California around in many ways, right? And restore that ability to live that California dream. And the way to do that is by just injecting some common sense into how we run things. Common sense in terms of how we spend our money, common sense of how we approach issues like homelessness, like crime, like the economy, and so many things in between. And I think if we do that, all of a sudden these things become much more attainable.
Now, do you think some people argue that California has changed a lot and that the California dream is not there? What are your thoughts?
I think anyone who says that things have changed, yes, things have changed on the government side, right? In terms of failed policies, they have changed, but the people haven't changed. Right? You have people who live in California, who've lived in California a long time, or who are newcomers to California, all who are here for one major reason, and it's not the weather, right? We've had a bad rainy season lately, right? 2 consecutive years. What it is the fact that this is historically considered a land of opportunity, right? And barriers are being placed in front of us to keep us from having that opportunity, much of which relates to affordability, right? Utility rates skyrocketed, insurance rates skyrocketed, housing costs have gone up dramatically, food costs, so many other things, and the ability to have a steady job that pays a living wage, if not more, have also diminished a lot. A lot of those jobs have been concentrated in Silicon Valley, concentrated in Hollywood, but if you're outside of certain spheres, it's hopeless. And I think what we need is to really restore that. And we're not going to do that by changing minimum wages. We're not going to do that by giving handouts to people. We're going to do that by creating true upward mobility, reducing costs of things like energy, housing, insurance, et cetera, and allowing businesses to come back into the state and really employ people with good jobs, not $20 fast food jobs that the government is bragging about, right? But real jobs in the science, technology, engineering, manufacturing realms, all things that have been leaving California en masse because of the regulatory climate, because of crime, homelessness, and because of overall cost of operations. And the moment we do that, and the moment those jobs start coming back to California, people are going to become not just able to survive, but prosper. And prosperity, I think, is what everyone wants. No one wants to be sitting there just getting by. People have been taught that that's the new normal. Be happy that you're just getting by. But getting by is not enough. I think I want to see people prosper because I'm a product of that. I've been gifted that. And now it's time, I think, for other people to have that ability themselves as well.
You have been involved with a group of activists, and you said that you all together started talking and people are coming up to you. Do you think California will significantly change in the next decade?
I'm confident that California is going to change in the next just 2 to 4 years, and here's why. Right now, we've seen the elite political class, right? People like Gavin Newsom as governor, Eleni Koulonakis as lieutenant governor, you have Fiona Ma as treasurer, we have so many others from insurance commissioner to everything in between who have presided over a dismantling of this state's success for regular people. Yes, they brag that our economy is so big, but for average Californians, that economy is not going down to them, right? Their opportunities are crashing, their affordability is dropping, and unemployment in California is higher than it is anywhere else in the nation. I don't view that as being a prosperous state. And on top of that, the numbers speak for themselves. We went from $100 billion budget surplus just a couple years ago to $73 billion deficit and growing today. Who was responsible for that? It was the elite ruling class. And people aren't not dumb. The very same people who started waking up during the pandemic are now waking up, just looking around them and seeing the problems that we have, realizing that they can't afford basic things, while the people who are in the ruling class who are laughing all the way to the bank. And ultimately, everyone is realizing that if we keep the people in office and keep elevating them to higher and higher and higher office, who caused these problems to begin with, our state is going to go down the tubes very quickly. If we want to have a chance to bring back the state, to truly turn it around and give people a chance at that California dream, the only way to do it is to bring in political outsiders, people who have not been involved in the establishment, who don't have their fingerprints on any of these problems that we have today, and who actually have not just slogans, but true, common sense, feasible solutions. This does not mean to say, oh, it has to be Republicans, right? This can be Democrats. And I think a lot of the people who are running, who are in office right now, have a D behind their name, but they don't live true to any of the true democratic principles of standing up for the little guy. They're taking care of the corporations, the people who are funding them, right? They've actually turned into exactly what they were complaining about 10 years ago. So I think if we have a new class of leaders who are regular people, who are the people who've been rising up and frustrated about what's going on, who have good solutions, who are listening to people around them rather than shunning them and censoring them, we have a damn good chance of succeeding as a state.
Houman David Hemmati, physician and scientist and a statewide activist. It was great to have you on California Insider.
Thank you so much for having me, Siyamak.
We have an exciting news for you. At California Insider, we created a new product. It's called California Insider Opinion. This is where our insiders and experts across the state are actually telling you what's going on behind the headlines. When there's a breaking news, a big issue, important issue happening in California, they're going to come on the screen and tell you what's happening behind the scenes. And these are like 7 to 10 minutes of opinion formats where the guests are talking to the camera directly, telling you what's happening.
You're paying a tax increase of tens of thousands of dollars every year as a condition of keeping what you already own.
Make sure to look at the description below, because you want to sign up on our newsletter, because a lot of these opinions might be very sensitive that some people in the social media platforms may not like. So we're putting them in the newsletter on our website so you can have them. These opinions will actually help you understand the political and policy landscape of California. We highly recommend you follow it.